Are you ready for the first lecture of the day or a keynote? Who's ready? Raise your hands. I always wanted to ask that. Who's ready? So, he's a lovely guy who comes as a first brave keynote speaker for the morning. His topic, always well known, technology. Or in Croatian, technology. Or in France, technology. Because that's what powers us now. His primary focus is on the topics of human-computer interaction and corporate foresight. He has worked with trillion-dollar companies. How you doing? That's nice. Central banks, governments, startup, those willing to challenge our poverty of imagination, awaken curiosity, and design incredible futures. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my great pleasure to welcome Nikolas Badminton.
Okay, thank you very much. Good morning, jutro. Okay, it took me 4 hours to memorize how to say dobre jutro. Yeah? Okay, thank you. Goodbye. No. So I'm Nick Badminton. I traveled here all the way from Toronto, Canada. I'm British. I actually grew up in the southwest of England in a small village. There's 4,000 people. My father ran the slaughterhouse in the town. Interesting place to grow up. It seemed like technology wasn't coming. But when I was 8 years old, I was at school, and there was a school book club, and I was reading through what books I could choose. And this book here jumped out off of the page to me. This is a book from 1979, The Osborne Book of the Future, A Trip to Time in the Year 2000 and Beyond. And this book, and do come and find me later if you want to take a look at this, is 44 years old. And this book ignited my excitement for futures when I was a kid. Now today that doesn't seem too strange, but in the 1970s in Margaret Thatcher's Britain, it wasn't necessarily a technological time. It was a time of challenge and struggle. It was a time where we had to see, a way forward that was different. I was excited about computing and how the world was going to change. But I was also reminded that we came from a background of 300 years of industrial revolutions. Our entire world has been built off the back of 3 different dimensions of change: information and communication, transportation, and energy. And these 3 things over 300 years came together to grow GDPs, to grow population in countries, to improve healthcare and education, to make sure that we could travel faster and further than ever before. And this growth has caused a challenge in our world. And the challenge in our world is that we feel that we're abundant and we're really thriving to make a change and a difference using all of this fantastic technology. But when we look at ourselves, we've got a real challenge, and the challenge is this. We have a poverty of imagination. We've been told to work Monday to Friday, 8 till 4 or 9 till 5, to go shopping at the weekends, to do other activities, to buy stuff that we build ourselves. But we've caused ourselves to have a lack of imagination in our work. And this is directly affecting how we operate in the world. It's actually been found that companies that ignite imagination, have vigilance about signals of change for the future, and implement this internally in their organizations, they've got faster rates of growth. They're bigger and more powerful than other companies that don't do this, and they actually drive more revenue and more profit as well. So it's really interesting to think about that imagination as being something that we're all here to do today, which is to really ignite what that is. This keynote is just going to begin a whole bunch of conversations through this entire keynote, through this entire conference. So let's take you on a little bit of a ride. So I run the Futurist think tank, and we're a group of people from around the world that focus on a number of different areas. And there's 4 different steps to what we do. The first thing we do is we scan for signals. These are distinct things that are indicating that the world is changing, the signals of change. Then we know that when we combine signals together, they become trends, right? And those trends indicate a trajectory forward that indicates that the world is going to change, that society and culture is going to shift, that technologies are going to accelerate potentially, and some technologies are potentially going to disappear as well. There are some positive futures, there are some challenging, more dystopian futures as well. And then we can build scenarios, and scenarios have become a buzzword in 2023, and they will be going forward, because this is a whole new way of thinking about a space for exploration of change. You know, what if in a particular year, these people in these places with these systems change in these ways, and they have these kinds of situations that we have to learn from in 20, 40, 50 plus years. But then it gets really exciting, and at the end of my keynote, I'm going to go a little deeper into this particular point, is the stories that we can really weave around how the future is going to feel. Because if we think of ourselves in 20 years' time, it's like thinking of a stranger. But if we can weave a story of ourselves in that future, and we can feel what it's like to have the dynamics with our families and our workplaces, our society and our culture, with all the systems and technologies and everything, it becomes real. And once it becomes real, we can take evidence back from those stories to today, and our strategic planning gets stronger. Our strategic planning gets stronger, we're future ready, we drive more profit and growth. So this is the essential nature of futures work, and more companies today are really waking up, and it's incredibly refreshing to come here to Zagreb, Croatia, to the Future Tense conference, and to see so many people, you know, on a mission to really open minds and change how we think about futures as well. Just before I was born, in the early 1960s, there was probably one of the greatest technology futurists doing some really important work in Stanford University. I always like to say this is the technology futurist that time forgot, but basically shaped our entire world. This is Douglas Engelbart. By 1968, he'd built a system, and it was called the Online System, or the NLS. And him and his team had actually come up with a whole new way of thinking and working. In fact, in 1968, he took the system down to the Civic Center in San Francisco. 1,000 people came in to see this. They set up modems so they could transfer data 30 miles from where the systems were to the actual presentation, like the first modems. He invented the mouse, the touchpad, desktop publishing, video conferencing. Douglas Engelbart was the reason that we could survive the pandemic with all of the systems that we had to survive. But we've kind of forgotten who this guy is. And the team, Bill English and the rest of the team that he worked with, really pioneered a whole new way of looking at personal computing. At the end of the keynote, 1,000 people stood up, rapturous applause, amazing. And they all went home, back to their jobs, working in computers with punch cards. Because things weren't going to change, right? People doubted that this was going to be something that was going to be significant, that the world was going to change significantly. But over the years, we then took that technology and developed it further. In fact, much of Douglas Engelbart's team then went on to work at Xerox PARC, so Palo Alto Research Center, hugely famous place. And they created the Alto. And they did about 2,000 demonstrations of this system. And the executives at Xerox, they were like, that looks cool, but we're selling copiers, and we've got new copiers, and people are always going to need copiers, and people are always going to need printers. I'm not sure about this personal computer. Who needs a personal computer at home? Seems silly today, right? Anyway, these old white guys, yeah, that's great, keep going on. Anyway, frustrated researchers, you know, they'd come up with graphical user interfaces, a whole new way of working. It was really exciting at the time for those that really got it. But things only changed when one person walked into the room after being told about this and being persuaded time and time again that this was going to be important. And this guy really changed the world.
What we saw was incomplete. They'd done a bunch of things wrong, but we didn't know that at the time. It's still, though, they had the germ of the idea was there, and they'd done it very well. And within, 10 minutes, it was obvious to me that all computers would work like this.
Within 10 minutes, it was obvious to me that all computers were going to work like this. In 1984, Apple released the Macintosh and completely changed the world. So Steve Jobs and his team, they said, this is amazing, got all of his team in, had a couple of demonstrations, took all of the notes, graphical user interfaces, we're going to reimagine that. And he chatted to the guys at Xerox. He said, I think this is interesting. Can I give you some stock in Apple so we can use this? They're like, sure. He gave them 100,000 shares in stock. Today, Xerox is worth about $2.6 billion in market cap. Apple is worth $2.7 trillion in market cap. Who are the people that were the visionaries in this case? The people that could see the signals of change, the trends going forward, that personal computing was going to be important, and understand the scenarios where it could be applied, and the stories of how culture was going to be bolstered and changed forever. That's still the power of Apple and a lot of the other companies in the area. But we should not forget that it all started with a guy called Douglas Engelbart that wanted to augment human capability. But with futures work, I always like to work with executives and government officials and leaders. And I always say, okay, this is about shifting our mindset from what is to what if. What if is an invitation to be curious. You can try and shut down lots of ideas about the future. It's never going to work that way. I don't believe you. But what if? Let's explore that together. And it's a really important lesson. So I'm going to be talking about that as we go through this keynote in a number of different areas. So what if we become future ready and drive change, profit, and growth? Why don't all of us take some of the ideas from today and go and start changing how our businesses think about strategic planning? So we don't think about 3 years, we think about 20, 40, 50, 100 plus years. Okay, technology, hyperconnectivity, I love it. I've been programming computers from about the age of 10 years old. I got on the internet in 1992. Our world is hyperconnected, everyone in the room is connected, and everyone's been touched by many different kinds of modern systems. And we're kind of caught in a world of data. And I use fairly traditional models of understanding data, and I've spent many years of my career in server rooms, building data systems, running very large teams, doing analytical models, data warehousing, or whatever. And, collection of data is one thing, and it's difficult, and hygiene is incredibly important. We turn that into information, then that becomes knowledge, and then ultimately it becomes wisdom. I think that we live in a wisdom economy. What we're doing here today is connecting. We're taking all of the information and knowledge that we have, and we're sharing it, and culturally it becomes significant, and that significance becomes the culture and the wisdom that drives our economies forward. And we use that for research and observation and feedback, and the loop goes on. But this is our entire life, right? If you love spreadsheets, you're at the bottom, and you're working your way up to information, right? If you love taking those spreadsheets and getting someone to explain it in a narrative, then you're a knowledge worker. And if you're someone that really likes to reimagine how the world can work, then you're really tapping into the wisdom of how the world is going to change. But we have to talk about artificial intelligence. And there's kind of two different things that I'm following that I find particularly interesting. One is, looking at Tesla's full self-driving capability and realizing that a 16-year-old can jump in a car and drive it as good as this system with almost little to no training, right? Because humans are the most complex, nuanced, capable sensory, intelligent systems. And then on the right, we've actually got robotics. And robotics is incredibly hard to achieve. I mean, we've seen Boston Dynamics and the back-flipping, dancing robots. This is a company out of Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada, called Sanctuary AI. And they've been learning hundreds of little tasks. But behind the scenes are humans controlling the robots. And the robots are learning from that input. We train the robots so that they can get better at what they do. We learn from the situation. We adjust. We train them some more. I mean, these are tools to us. These aren't replacements. This is a narrative that needs to go away. The replacement of humans in the world, the destruction of jobs and whatever. But sure, it's definitely going to change. There's no doubt. And I have to talk about ChatGPT. I think it was in my contract, actually. Who believes that ChatGPT is going to change the world? Who shouted no? The rebellion backstage. It's interesting, some do, some don't. There's a lot of hype. And the media sure likes to have the story about this is going to replace all of these jobs and all these people are going to be out of work and it's creative. Oh, we're on the path to artificial general intelligence. And it's interesting to me, and I follow this. I was an early adopter of generative AI systems. I've been following it. I did a degree in applied psychology and computing, and my degree culminated with me looking at artificial intelligence and language systems and language rebuilding of grammar. So I've been in this game for a long time. So when this comes along, it's super exciting. You know, there's going to be an app ecosystem. It's going to be applied in a lot of different ways. It's a tool. It's going to be useful. We have to change the dialogue around this. But this is something that I've been talking about for a long time, and we're starting to get there. Sort of the replacement of the drudgery of the work we have to do today of dragging the data and cleaning that and preparing information is kind of starting to be streamlined using these tools. I'm here for it. If you love spreadsheets, you might not be able to use spreadsheets in the future in the same way. But you might be doing it for fun. There's a Microsoft Excel Global Championship, and you can win prizes, right? But it's interesting if we really think about artificial intelligence and how the world is changing. We kind of think that AGI is coming. Microsoft wrote a paper that, you know, that ChatGPT and OpenAI, these large language models were the beginning of AI, or AGI. It's very worrying when scientists are told to write marketing PR kind of speak within a research context, right? But I follow people like Jan LeCun, who's head of artificial intelligence and those systems at Meta. Before we can get to godlike AI, we need to get through dog-like AI. And we're kind of in that state of kind of useful, very narrow application, things are going to change AI. And that's cool. And we're going to be there for a long time. Nuanced human intelligence is not so easy to codify. In fact, the intelligence in AI should be flipped around. And it should really be called intelligence augmentation, because we're human, we're intelligent, we're the people in charge. And we are being augmented, very much like Douglas Engelbart was talking about all those years ago in the 1960s. But we're kind of very keen to outsource our cognitive capabilities. About a month ago, I was in Toronto. I ordered an Uber. Be here in 3 minutes. In 3 minutes, it said, it'll be here in 3 minutes. And 2 minutes after that, it said, it'll be here in 4 minutes. So we've kind of like assumed that these systems are doing the hard work for us, but they're kind of proxies for, you know, just expectation setting. And then I jumped in the car, and Uber said, go that way, go north, up to Bloor, turn right, and go to the place where I was going. It wasn't the fastest way, but it was logical because the car was pointed that way. We turned around, I told him to turn around, and human logic overtook the system, and then the system adjusted itself, it was fine. So we're so keen with all of the applications that we've got on our phones to outsource our cognitive capability that we have to come back to what we can really do and make good decisions on our own. It's really important. And that creates a context of us using these tools, which are useful in our world and have application. But they don't replace what we have to do. I love this story. This is an artist called Simon Werkert in Berlin a couple of years ago. He decided to play the system with Google Maps. He took 99 GPS-enabled phones, and he set them all on Google Maps, and he put them in a little cart, and he walked slowly across the bridge of the Spree in Berlin, causing a massive traffic jam with no cars. And he slowly walked around the streets, and everyone in Berlin avoided driving those streets and avoided driving those bridges, even though they knew that it shouldn't be like that, but because the systems told us that it was that way. It was a really good cognitive experiment on don't necessarily trust the systems, go over and beyond. And if you want to question them, question them. I mean, I've questioned like Waze and Google Maps, and I've gotten into trouble. So they can be useful. But you have to use your common sense, and that common sense is human, and human is greater than what we've got in the systems we have today. And we have to be really careful of the systems, the gathering of data, the processing of this. With any of these large language models, there's bias in the systems. The Coded Bias, amazing documentary. Do go and look at that. Also look at Weapons of Math Destruction, and basically anything by Cathy O'Neill. She talks about algorithms and humanity. And there's also a great thinker, Jaron Lanier, I've been following since the 1990s, the godfather of artificial intelligence. He's very critical on these systems, but he's been working with people like Microsoft on things like data dignity, where we can own the data that we produce. It completely changes how the terms and conditions of the systems we use work back to agency and equity and control back to us. We become the information economy ourselves. So it's interesting to think that instead of signing our lives away in terms of conditions that we never read, that suddenly we're going to take back control with simple statements saying you own all data created by you, and it's you and you alone can only sign the right away for us to use that in a commercial sense, and you can make money at the same time. So I follow these things, and I wonder, what if we empower humans with useful machines? This is about tools. This is not about replacement. And that brings me on to start thinking about a number of different cool areas of technology. When I was asked to do a future of technology, it's like, I could talk about anything and everything. So I'm going to get into it a little bit. But some of this might be surprising, and I look at broad systems around the support and the foundational elements within humanity and what we really need. On the left here, we have Ian the chicken. Ian's a great chicken. He works for a company called Just out of California. He's actually retired and he's on a farm and he's quite happy. I spoke to the people at Just a couple of years ago when I presented this case study, and they were like, yeah, Ian's fine. Ian provided some cells, and Ian's cells have been used to produce cellular protein, chicken. And this is a big change. There's lots of legislation going through in the United States, places like Singapore, Israel, and China to make the production of cellular protein happen at scale. Hugely important. By 2050, the protein market in the world is going to be about $7.2 trillion. Even if you disrupt 1% of that market with cellular protein, that's a huge, huge market opportunity. Plus, it's a way to provide protein in places where it might be difficult or get more difficult with climate change and whatever to raise cattle, raise chickens and whatever. And on the right, we've got Inox, a farm run by robotics and artificial intelligence controlled environments growing greens and vegetables in vertical farms. And as our cities get bigger, we're going to have to realize that these solutions are going to provide food for everyone in our communities. Then we've got solar and renewable energy. It's super exciting, it's happening. The important thing about solar and a lot of these solutions is that they can be decentralized, they can live on our homes and our factories, that suddenly we can generate our own electricity, we can really drive our world forward. And then on the right-hand side, we've got the promise of fusion, nuclear fusion. This is a company out of Vancouver as well called General Fusion. There's a joke in the nuclear world, which is, when's fusion coming? 30 years. It's always 30 years away. It's difficult. This is the power of the sun. How can we create the power of the sun to drive us forward? So there's two different dialogues. We can start working on getting solar renewables, replacing fossil fuels. We can also look at the long term as well. Both are important. And then we're thinking about money, and this is a huge dialogue right now in the United States and other countries around the world. Do we stay with cash? Or do we move to full digital wallets? Do we actually go to a central bank digital currency? If we go to a central bank digital currency, do we imagine a world where that's linked to a biometric ID and our qualifications, our driving license, our health passes, our passports? Is that going to control us? And this is the narrative that's being weaved out by the Republicans in the US right now. We're not going to lose our freedom. Freedom is cash. But the world is moving towards this new digital currency. And we're not talking about cryptocurrency or Bitcoin, Ethereum, or any of the other derivatives. We're talking about something that could be incredibly powerful, incredibly useful, and completely disrupt systems that are 40-plus years old that transfer money around the world, like SWIFT, right? But cultural disruption is hard. Then we've got quantum computing. This is a nascent field. Lots of people are trying to work on this and work out how this new way of computing can be used for everything from cryptography and being able to look at proteins and different materials. It's hugely exciting, again, very difficult to work on. And also, as I discussed earlier, artificial general intelligence. How human does that intelligence have to be for us to believe that that's got some kind of sentience as well? And this is a robot by Engineered Arts. It's got a lot of emotion, and it's kind of weird. It's like the uncanny valley. It makes us feel a little strange inside when we think about that. And then we've got the metaverse, and I know Sophie's going to talk about the metaverse later. It's interesting. Are we stepping into a world where we want to think about technology and that divide and that connection between our physical reality, our digital reality, and everything in between? Or do we want to look at one of the original technologies in the world, plant medicine, and take us deeper to heal the problems that we have in the world by being spiritual. Psilocybin mushrooms, iboga, DMT through ayahuasca, shamanic ceremonies. If anyone wants to talk about this later, come talk to me. I can talk about this for hours. I do not have any of this. Okay? But for 4,000 years, this has been around, and this has been changing societies. But then we've got modern technology that's also going to change societies in similar ways. It's interesting how technology is a reflection of other technology as well. But we tend to kind of overestimate the impact of everything. If you look at the press, it's like artificial general intelligence and generative AI, it's going to change the world. Metaverse is going to change the world. Self-driving cars are going to change the world. Internet of Things is going to change the world. We overestimate. But the reality is as we travel through time, 10, 20, 30 years, it takes about 30 years for technologies to really seep into culture and change it. We desperately underestimate its impact. If you think about smartphones, AT&T never thought that cellular networks were going to be important. And after getting it so wrong, they had to buy their way back in. You know, Kodak invented the digital camera, never thought it was going to change the world, and they went bankrupt in 2012, even though they had 2/3 of the market share of people that used cameras and bought film in the mid-90s, right? Short term, we always overestimate. Long term, we always underestimate. It's called Amara's Law from Roy Amara at the Institute for the Future. What if we explore new innovations to evolve humanity? That evolution of humanity is really important to me. And that's kind of what I think we're here to talk about in the next couple of days. But let's talk about planetary wellness and kind of looking at the bigger megatrends to really prime, some of the bigger discussions of the next couple of days. Economic shifts are going to happen. By 2050, this is going to be the pecking order. China, US, India, 1, 2, 3. Indonesia, number 4, and Germany, number 5, in terms of economic powers in the world. Just think of the dynamics and the geopolitics between all of these, especially between the top 3, okay? Hugely populous countries like India and China and the United States, and the waning of power in the West and the shift to the East. It's hugely fascinating. I could talk about that for hours, so come chat to me as well. Then the growth of Africa, and it's so interesting and exciting. I've got some of my team members down in South Africa that are doing really essential work in futures. The median age of an African today is 18 years old. Lagos, Nigeria, is going to become 55 million people and the largest megacity in the world by 2050. 88 million by 2100. Nigeria as a country is going to be 400 million people by 2050. It's going to be bigger than the United States. Imagine the power and the innovative minds and the business we could do with the amazing people in Nigeria. We need to kind of open our minds. We need to change some of the old narratives in the world as well. We need to think about climate change. This is hugely important. These are the warming stripes. So since like the late 1800s to modern day 2022, we can see how the average temperature has grown over time. This is the global view. It's out of the University of Reading in the UK. We're in a dire straits. The world is not going to get cooler. I like to say that 2023 is the coolest the world's ever going to be in the next 150 years. We're not going to find drastic new technologies that are going to cool the world. We're just going to have to find technologies that help us survive the changes that are coming in the Anthropocene. But that sort of makes me think about probably one of the most important dynamics in the world as a futures explorer, and that's the dynamic between the water, energy, food nexus. If we've got a shortage of water, and we're getting that way, we're going to affect 98% of energy production by 2030. And by 2050, we're going to have a scarcity of vegetables and legumes. In fact, it's going to be a deficit of about 35% of what we have today. So we have to work out how we can preserve water first and foremost. We then have to work out how that domino affects through these other systems and helps us really survive in whole new ways. We've been used to abundance. We've been used to waste. The Industrial Revolution has created a culture of waste, and now we have to rethink that entirely. We've also got a culture where we've got information systems that are being used as misinformation systems. And I talk a lot with advertising agencies and governments and companies about this as well, how we really need to get a hold on how the world is changing with misinformation. Places like Finland have got policy and education programs for school and continued education with adults to train people how to look out for misinformation. That's how we need to be thinking about this. We need to empower the individuals and not let ourselves be weaponized by foreign state actors, like we've seen in so many different cases of elections or trucker protests in Canada or whatever, right? And then probably the biggest challenge I think that we face as humanity is the multi-generational trauma, the memories that we carry epigenetically from our parents, their parents, their parents, their parents. You know, our parents and their parents have been through traumatic times of struggle with access to food or rations or having been through war. And there's a whole number of problems, and we have to really work out how we're going to heal the world. I think if we can actually heal the world and think about programs of wellness and mental health resiliency, we're going to fix so many problems ahead of any of the technologies that can promise us an abundant and exciting new world. And I think this is all about empathy. What if we deepen global empathy and connection? What if we start caring more about each other? You know, conversation before war. You know, feeding our neighbors and communities and bringing people together. Hugely important. When I think about futures work, and I call myself a futurist, and someone called me a futurist 10 years ago, I found it very strange. But once I adopted that, I was like, I'm going to lean into this. This is going to be super exciting. I actually think that we're hope engineers. I think we're at a time where people feel desperate and lost, and I think that people are struggling with so many different things that we have to double down and think, okay, how can we use our skills to create a better world, to explore in new ways, to use that to drive our businesses? I mean, going back to the framework that I use, the collection and scanning of signals, and I've done tens of thousands, my brain's full of tens of thousands of those. The creation of trends and trends indexes and working with clients that can suddenly see multiple ways forward for their businesses and scenarios of how things are going to play out, but the big stories. And this is really about the storytelling that we do. And there's a real power in storytelling. I like to use the analogy of Lego when I think about signals. Does anyone know, and if you know, shout it out, does anyone know how many combinations of Lego come from 6 different building blocks? It's like, everyone's like, someone's on the internet at the back. Someone used to think it was about 102 million. It's actually 915 million different combinations of Lego bricks. If you actually think about 6 different kinds of signals, and you exacerbate that across the whole of humanity, and different countries, and different geopolitical sort of tensions in different ways, there's infinite futures ahead of us. One thing you'll realize with all of the people that are talking about futures over the next few days is we always say it's futures plural. That plurality is important. Everyone in the room has got a different path forward. And if you work together, or you're together as a couple or whatever, as families, all of that, all those interchanges changes our destiny and our futures. So that analogy of Lego is we can build from all of the signals that we collect in a lot of different ways and start to tell those stories.
Plans for the future of YVR are taking shape. Our 2037 master plan is a blueprint for an airport that'll continue to reflect the best of BC. Sustainable, welcoming, and diverse. YVR will be a feast for the senses, a hive of activity and interaction, a business hub for entrepreneurs, and a unique retail experience that is second to none. Help shape the future of our world-class sustainable airport by attending public meetings and sharing your input online.
So in 2017, myself and my team worked with a PR agency in Vancouver, in Canada, and the airport, YVR. If you've ever traveled with YVR, it's a beautiful airport. To do public engagement. And how do we engage people and inspire people? Remember when I said, if we can create the feeling of a future, we can get people engaged. Well, I wrote 5 science fiction stories about customer service and going through security, what was happening on the side of the runways, and a whole number of different things. And we pushed it out there on a website, and we did a media tour, and I was on a tour with the CEO and President Craig Richmond. And we had 4 sessions planned. People would come into the airport, we'd do design sessions, we'd get some ideas, we'd make the airport better. We're listening to people. Cool. Anyway, we did those 4 sessions, and then some of the mayors from the other cities in the lower mainland in British Columbia said, oh, we want to be part of this as well. We ended up doing about 16 different sessions. It was a wildly successful campaign, 18 million impressions in a province of only about 3.5 million people. So people were going back and back again. They were interested in these stories and how things were going to change in our world. And that potency is so important in public engagement and dialogue. You know, and there's some workshops happening tomorrow as well. Get involved with those workshops because these are the places where we can play. But from a commercial engagement perspective, it's incredibly powerful. And then last year, someone sent me a link and they're like, did you see this, Nick? This is the new Pier D in YVR Airport. And here's the picture of the vertical farm that we imagined in our science fiction stories. Whilst they're not growing food, they're growing trees. In fact, it's a forest. There's augmented reality, there's sound, there's calmness, things that we don't necessarily think about in airports. They literally built the science fiction that we wrote. And for me, that's Future's work really coming to life, reimagining. You can hear the waves, no stress in the airport, even if you're running for a plane, right? But it's amazing to think that some people actually stood up and took the step forward to build the future. And for me, I think that's the possibility that we have. We can really start thinking about those future horizons and almost accelerating our progress towards them in a better way, for better experience in this case. But when I was researching Zagreb, it's my first time in Zagreb, it's a beautiful city. I've got some great friends that live here as well, so it's fantastic to be here. I sort of wondered, how could I tell a story of Zagreb? And in my keynotes, I generally write some design fiction. And how could I tap into some Croatian culture? And some of the great writers like Miroslav Kleza, excuse me. Was that good? Nearly? No, apologies. Anyway, this is the AI version. So I wrote a story. I said, I want a poem in the style of my dear friend Miroslav. And this is what one of those systems wrote. In the year 2100, my mind doth wander into Zagreb's destiny, a city a millennium old, yet still sprightly, where creativity and community thrive so brightly. Technology enabled, yet seemingly free from its grip. A place where one's identity is their own to equip. A place for redefining how modern life should be. A place for families, young and old, to live and see. Abundant water, decentralized energy, and gardens aplenty, springing from rooftops at communities' verdant bounty. Philosophies of zero waste, zero carbon, and circularity, teaching the world how to live better with all of our sincerity. This, our city, Zagreb, in 2100, a world without algorithms, humanity's creativity front and centered, where our imaginations soar and our spirits lifted, a place where human connection is never once shifted. And that's the power of Future's work. It's poetic, it's lyrical, it's interesting, it can be inspirational. There are tons of signals and trends and things that we can explore. We can kind of hatch it up using AI, I apologize, to take someone's potential perspective. But I always like to think that the Future's work that we do is the energy to think bigger and change the world. And in every keynote, I always get asked a question, is like, how can we start this work, Nick? You've talked a lot of cool stuff, and my mind is spinning. Well, I've actually put together a guide on Futurist.com. If you go to Futurist.com/future tense, there's a guide of how to start the process of collecting signals automatically on a daily basis, how to ask the questions, some cool podcasts and people to follow, right? And how to start thinking about those scenarios and signals and start thinking about those horizons ahead of us. So you can scan this. or you can go to futurist.com/future tense, and you can start your journey on becoming a futurist. And this conference is really priming this whole activity, and some of you might be really new to this field, and it's exciting, and it's going to give you a headache because there's lots of things to see and do and people to learn from. When I started really being serious about futures 10 years ago, I started a journey towards something really interesting and important, and I wrote a book called Facing Our Futures that came out earlier this year, and that book really is a signpost to dozens of amazing thinkers. But really, this is not the future of technology. This whole keynote is actually the use of all of these amazing systems and things that change in our world, and the human ingenuity that drives the building of technology, but ultimately for the future of humanity and the betterment of that. And that's why we're here. That's why I work so hard. Doing futures work with so many different governments and so many different companies. And I'm here for 2 days, and I'd love to have as many conversations as I can. I'd love to take your questions. Thank you very much.
No. Thank you, dear Nikolas.
Thank you.
For speaking Croatian, for finding AI Miroslav Krležak, who sounded a little bit high because he was a bit harsh woman. That's lovely to hear that as well. Are you ready for your questions?
Yeah, questions.
And we would like to thank you because you finished 10 seconds before the time. So
10 seconds.
A pleasure. 10 seconds. Always. So, how can we stop people from being scared of ChatGPT or AI? We can't, thank you.
How can we stop people? We can't stop people from being scared of it, but what we can do is we can contextualize exactly what it is, and we can have expertise saying, okay, this is how it works, here's its reference points, this is how it comes to some of the things that you're finding out in the world, and here are the things that you need to be worried about and need to be excited about. You just need to explain it to them, demystify it.
Explanation always. In the next few years, which trend today you believe will be gone or useless?
Or useless. Trends, you know what? Trends don't necessarily disappear. They're always there. So this book is ridiculous. There's so much crazy stuff. People growing stuff under the sea, growing stuff on the move, moving to Mars, robots in the home and whatever. We could discount most of this book. But no, it just goes into the library of futures. And do you know what? 20, 30 years' time, we can come back to it and realize, that's still a bit crazy. But there's like the Hyperloop in this book. It's kind of interesting. Is the Hyperloop ever going to happen? Maybe. Who knows?
Who knows? Trends are here to be settled on now. Okay, let's go. How to find balance between using and using too much of technology.
I mean,
share your experience.
I'm completely addicted to technology, so I'm like the worst person to ask about this. But, you know, turn it off, put it in a box, give your wife the key, and go outside and enjoy some time with your family. I mean, that's really important. So.
Okay, with technology and family or without technology? And
well,
family?
you know, my kid's 2.5. He wants an iPad all the time. Okay. So there's a struggle, but it's good.
Do you think that blockchain will ever replace existing monetary system?
No.
Praise the Lord.
Mostly because of scale. Mostly because of scale of transactional processing. It's interesting in a number of different ways, and it can be used for immutable ledgers associated with identity, a number of different things. Not for money. I just don't see it happening.
Do you think futurists influence the future itself?
Well, we have to. We have to. Why am I here if it doesn't? We have to. We all influence the future. Everything that you do today, every single action, and this is what I say, and this is really important. You're either a bystander and you're watching someone else create a future that you have to consume, or you're actively part of it and you're creating the world that you want to live in. So you have to be part of that.
How is it possible to use technology to preserve human connection and bolster empathy?
This is interesting. I've got this one picture at home. And it's a picture when I was 18 and my father was there and my grandfather. He was very short. My grandfather was very short. And there's something about that memory that takes me back and reminds me. Now, that can be in digital form, and that's okay. I kind of find it creepy that people are starting to codify their grandmother's voice and then you can speak to your grandmother when she's dead for the next 25 years. Super weird.
You're actually an amazing guy, because we grew up in a system where questions were not allowed, and you have like hundreds of questions,
Cool.
and we have like 30 seconds to answer
Yeah,
it all.
go.
So, how do we scale empathy when you said now empathy? Can we scale it?
How do
Can
we do what?
scale empathy?
How do we scale empathy?
Yeah. From 0 to 1, like being
Do you know what? That's a really tough question. So, we're not just born with empathetic connection in many ways. In some ways we are. There's neurological connection, mirror neurons connecting. I think the way that we scale empathy is by scaling our ability to be quiet and listen. It's something that I struggle with, and it's something that I work actively on. So the more that we listen, the more empathy that we can have. The more empathy we have, the more we have the ability to listen. Ad infinitum.
I was listening. Good. First step is there. So the last question before you leave was, when you start working with governments and everything to change the future, what is the first step? Is it to call you, email you, or you say, read my Q&A?
Yeah, so I did a big thing with a big government earlier this year. They just emailed me and they said, hey, can you help us on this project talking about this particular subject and writing a paper? And we worked it out, and we spent 3 months working together to create something amazing that I'm not allowed to tell anyone about. But it's incredibly important. It's going to reshape policy in that part of the world, and that's the work that I'm here for.
Well, I wish you receive a mail from Croatian government for 3 months,
Please.
summertime in Croatia, to do your business. Why not? Ladies and gentlemen, Nikolas Badminton, the first
Thank you
keynote
so
speaker.
much.
Thank you, Nikolas. Enjoy the rest of your days in Croatia.